At Novoleksiivka, in Russian-occupied territory, a fireball rips through the night, and a column of black smoke climbs more than 1,000 feet into the southern sky. Windows shatter half a mile away. A Russian command post goes dark within seconds. In under 2 minutes, over 1,400 tons of artillery shells and dozens of Iskander-M missiles detonate in a chain reaction. They explode inside concrete walls more than 2 feet thick, walls meant to shield them. The beating heart of Russia's firepower along the Kherson-Zaporizhia axis is collapsing from within.
Alert command immediately.
No aircraft, no cruise missiles, just a 3-layer air defense fortress pierced so cleanly it never grasped it had been breached. And to understand how an ammunition depot 52 miles behind the front line became an inferno in just 113 seconds, we have to rewind exactly 72 hours before the sky ignited. 3 days before the explosion, a KH-11 reconnaissance satellite orbiting nearly 290 miles above Earth swept over a strip of farmland in Kherson. According to publicly described specifications, this system can achieve resolution measured in mere inches. The imagery showed no tanks, no launchers. Just 14 newly painted, pale blue warehouses arranged in 2 perfect rows in the middle of an empty field. Inside Ukraine's military intelligence headquarters in Kiev, a 29-year-old imagery analyst fixated on a subtle anomaly. The warehouse roofs were 6 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the surrounding ground. It wasn't shadow, it was thermal inertia. Evidence of thick concrete and industrial-scale climate control running non-stop beneath the surface. This wasn't a grain depot. It was the largest Russian ammunition hub in southern Ukraine, storing an estimated 1,400 to 1,600 tons of artillery shells, dozens of Iskander-M missiles, and around 3,800 FPV drones. Its material value neared $320 million. Strategically, it was the beating heart of Russian firepower along the southern axis. The walls, 24 to 28 inches thick, were designed to absorb fragmentation, but every bunker has to breathe. Metal-grated ventilation clusters on the roofs fed the exhaust system, and those lungs produced the abnormal heat signature. Ukraine didn't just locate the depot, they identified its weak point. Detection was never the challenge. Striking a target 52 miles behind the line of contact was the real problem. It was protected by layered Pantsir systems, S-400 coverage, and electronic warfare capable of warping the spectrum. Ukraine lacked heavy bunker busters and air superiority, so they wouldn't smash the wall. They would make it open itself. At 6:14 a.m., near the M14 junction, about 87 miles north of Novoleksiivka, 3 aging KAMAZ trucks rolled south through the mist of occupied territory. The logos read, Agricultural Technical Repair Services. Faded paint, torn tarps, perfectly forgettable. The paperwork was airtight. Contract codes matched. Red stamps were fresh. On paper, they carried road equipment. In reality, beneath civilian cargo and shock-absorbing foam, sat 18 UJ-22 airborne drones with their wings removed. Each weighed about 187 pounds, spanning nearly 11 feet across when assembled. In each nose sat a roughly 44-pound shape-charged PBX warhead, designed not to break concrete, but to punch through ventilation grills and detonate inside warehouses packed with shells. The total cost of the entire fleet was about $540,000. The target ahead was worth more than $300 million. This was not symmetrical warfare. It was pure leverage. In 48 hours, they passed 5 Russian checkpoints. Clean documents, fluent dialect, and a thin envelope with $300 tucked under the invoices. No inspections, no unloading. At the final checkpoint, less than 20 meters out, a sergeant joked about potholes and waved them through. The trucks kept moving, quietly carrying the biggest breach in Russia's defenses that month. 2:20 a.m. on the night of the attack. In a pine forest roughly 41 miles northeast of the target, 6 Ukrainian technicians began assembling the drones. No headlights, no raised voices, only faint infrared reflections gliding across composite frames and metal fittings. Wings locked into place, bolts tightened, batteries connected, inertial navigation systems spun up, nose cameras calibrated. Target coordinates and flight corridors were uploaded through encrypted satellite links. Each drone received a role: decoy, primary strike, or hunter. No one discussed failure. but everyone understood that at least 1/3 would never return. 2:47 a.m. 18 electric motors began to spin. The sound was low and steady, almost swallowed by the wind. One by one, the drones lifted off, climbed to assigned altitudes, and split into 3 attack axes. 6 decoys climbed to roughly 720 feet, broadcasting open navigation signals and flying directly toward Novoleksiivka. They were programmed to be detected as early as possible. 8 main attackers flew terrain hugging at around 130 feet. GPS completely disabled, relying on inertial guidance combined with terrain matching visual algorithms. The final 4 hunters held about 300 feet, flying slightly slower, waiting for their moment to strike the Pantsir batteries themselves. South of Kherson, the sky remained quiet. No sirens, no tracer fire. Just 18 small points of light advancing toward a steel fortress they intended to make open its own doors. 3:02 a.m. Russian Air Defense Command Post at Novoleksiivka. Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Sokolov stood before the radar screen of a Pantsir S-1 system. Pale green light reflected off a face that was tired but alert. 3 Pantsir units formed a triangle over the depot, overlapping coverage to minimize blind spots. Behind that inner ring stood an S-400 unit for long-range surveillance. And deeper still, electronic warfare systems prepared to saturate critical frequencies. On paper, it was a defensive architecture, built to make intrusion prohibitively expensive. Publicly available specifications describe each Pantsir carrying 12 ready-to-fire missiles, capable of reacting within seconds after detection, supported by twin 30mm cannons. Sokolov believed in procedure more than propaganda. 4 years of war had taught him that discipline and reaction cycles matter more than slogans.
Core breach imminent.
6 clear tracks appeared on the northern radar sector. Moderate altitude, direct vector toward the depot. Sokolov did not rush to fire. He ordered electro-optical confirmation. Infrared imagery showed small drone-like targets, weak thermal signatures, steady movement, no evasive maneuvers. Target confirmed, the radar crew reported. Sokolov authorized missile engagement, conserving cannon ammunition for close range. 2 Pantsir systems fired. White-hot streaks cut the darkness at supersonic speed. Within seconds, 6 bright points in the sky blossomed into fireballs at approximately 720 feet. The first wave was erased, but that was only the visible layer. At roughly 130 feet, 8 main strike drones advanced under a different logic. Ground-based radar, however advanced, remains bound by the physical horizon. At tens of miles distance, extremely low-flying objects can be masked by terrain and Earth's curvature. These drones skimmed canals and slid along forest edges. They adjusted altitude by mere dozens of feet to avoid rising above the horizon for more than a moment. While Sokolov logged a clean defensive success, a second threat was closing in beneath the line of sight. Simultaneously in Skadovsk, roughly 28 miles south, the S-400 unit received initial alerts. Its long-range radar had briefly tracked the 6 medium-altitude decoys, the same ones already destroyed by the Pantsir. Before authorization procedures could complete, the tracks vanished. The inner ring had handled it. The S-400 remained on standby. Minutes later, as the truly dangerous low-flying drones approached, the S-400's radar picture looked different. At barely over 100 feet in rapidly closing distance, the targets sat below the long-range radar horizon. What remained were ground clutter and faint intermittent returns. Insufficient justification to launch a multi-million-dollar 40N6 missile. The S-400 was not disabled. It was not deceived. It was simply built for a different kind of battlefield. And on that night, it had nothing suitable to shoot. Sokolov ordered intensified electronic jamming. Transmission power increased. Critical frequency bands were saturated. The electromagnetic environment around Novoleksiivka thickened into an invisible fog. GPS signals distorted. Inertial systems began accumulating air. One drone in the main attack group was affected first. Its navigation system detected abnormal drift. Safety algorithms triggered. To avoid terrain collision under degraded data, it climbed several dozen feet. That small movement pushed it above the radar horizon. Seconds were enough. A Pantsir locked and fired. A flash split the field. Ukraine lost drone number 7. Sokolov believed he understood the enemy's method. He ordered tighter low-altitude scans and parameter adjustments for terrain-following targets. But during recalibration and reprioritization, the remaining 7 drones closed to within roughly 9 miles of the depot.
13 til 6 om morgenen.
Ukraine executed the second move. The 4 hunters activated. Their target was not the warehouse. It was the Pantsir systems guarding it. One drone suddenly climbed deliberately, increasing its radar cross-section to resemble a high-value object. The Western Pantsir responded exactly by doctrine: lock and fire. During the guidance phase, the fire control radar concentrated heavily in that direction to ensure a precision intercept. In that locked moment, 2 drones surged upward from an offset vector at a distance of only a few hundred yards. The crew reacted too late, switching to 30mm cannons. Tracer rounds slashed across the night. One drone disintegrated mid-air. The second maintained trajectory and slammed into the phased array radar assembly. The shaped charge detonated on impact. It channeled explosive energy into a focused jet rather than dispersing. Molten metal penetrated the protective housing and drove straight into the electronic core. Inside the command cabin, radar screens flickered violently, then went dark. The system was not reduced to scrap metal, but it lost its most critical function: the ability to see and lock targets. One node of the defensive triangle had been blinded. For several dozen seconds, the triangular coverage was no longer perfect. Overlapping zones formed a narrow gap, not enough to collapse the system, but enough for drones to slip through, if timing helped. The strike on the Pantsir came at a cost. 200 drones were lost, one shredded by cannon fire, one sacrificed in the radar impact. The gap was still narrow. The remaining 2 hunters pressed forward and were also destroyed. Each explosion was a subtraction already calculated in advance. The plan had accounted for this attrition. To open the door, payment was required. 3:18 a.m. The 7 remaining main attackers were within roughly 3 miles of the depot, detecting increased low-altitude tracks from the north and east. Sokolov ordered the 2 remaining operational Pantsirs to create a cannon fire curtain, saturating the air with 30mm rounds to form a temporary steel wall. Bright streams of tracer fire interlaced overhead. 3 drones intentionally climbed slightly, exposing themselves within that corridor to draw fire. One by one, they were hit and detonated. But every second they remained airborne, forced air defense crews to split their sensor focus. 13 til 9 om morgenen. 4 final drones remained, roughly 1 mile from the warehouse row. No decoys left, no reserve force behind. Only 4 composite airframes cutting through the darkness. Electric motors at maximum output for the last stretch. 1 remaining air defense unit acquired a weak, close-range track. The crew prepared to launch a missile, but the distance collapsed too quickly. Missile ignition, acceleration, course correction, each required seconds. 1 missile fired in a final attempt, detonating a few dozen yards behind its target. Too late. 3:19:42 a.m. The 4 UJ-22 drones did not strike the concrete walls. They struck the lungs. The first penetrated the camouflage mesh and ventilation grills of Warehouse 3, dropping in the stacks of 152mm artillery shells. A micro-delay fuse activated inside. The shaped charge focused its energy into a single penetrating jet, igniting ammunition within the enclosed space. The second dove into the ventilation cluster of Warehouse 7, where Iskander-M missiles were undergoing maintenance cycles. The explosion did not produce an immediate Hollywood flash. It was a compressed punch into solid fuel and conventional warheads. The third struck Warehouse 11, packed with additional ammunition and auxiliary materials. The fourth missed by several yards, impacting an outer wall and merely scarring the concrete. But 3 internal detonations were enough. 13:19:40 og 3 a.m. In Warehouse 3, pressure spiked. Concrete walls over 2 feet thick, designed to resist external fragments, now trapped shockwaves inside. Artillery shells began detonating in sequence. Walls ruptured outward. Concrete slabs, weighing hundreds of pounds, were blown free, becoming giant fragments striking adjacent buildings. Warehouse 7 ignited next. Dozens of Iskander missiles did not detonate as nuclear devices, but their solid fuel released immense energy. The roof lifted, then collapsed in flame. The second explosion merged with the first into cascading shockwaves. Within moments, nearly 60 missiles and thousands of artillery rounds detonated in a chain reaction. releasing energy roughly equivalent to 8 tons of TNT. A fireball more than 350 feet wide erupted into the night. Temperatures were sufficient to melt steel and fracture reinforced concrete. The shock wave radiated outward like an invisible wall. Within several hundred feet, pressure was enough to crush vehicles and hurl bodies. Sokolov's command post, roughly 500 meters away, convulsed violently. Windows shattered, equipment toppled. He was thrown from his position, severely injured as the structure deformed under extreme overpressure. The defensive system, once considered robust, was reduced to twisted, glowing metal inside a storm of fire.
Right there. Surface temperature
3:47 a.m. More than 40 miles to the northeast, the Ukrainian technical team saw the smoke column rising more than 1,000 feet above the horizon. The team leader transmitted a short confirmation. Target destroyed. Exfiltration underway. Satellite imagery later confirmed the damage. Approximately 56 Iskander-M missiles eliminated. More than 1,400 tons of artillery ammunition detonated. Thousands of FPV drones burned. At least 2 Pantsir systems disabled or severely damaged. Estimated material loss exceeded $300 million. That is the true arithmetic of destruction. Victory does not belong to the side with more weapons, but to the side that identifies and strikes the correct weak point. Now it is your turn to think. If you were the Russian commander who just lost more than $300 million in under 2 minutes, what would you do to protect the next depot? Would you thicken the air defense ring, intensify electronic warfare, disperse ammunition across multiple smaller sites, or redesign rear area logistics entirely? Write your plan in the comments. The next battlefield begins with this debate.